My dear friends, as I said at the beginning, this is not just an accident, it is a God incident, and we need to be very much aware that God is at work in this afternoon. All the graces are in the air, hovering around us, and we can be an obstacle to their passage. One is through the illness of agitation. The other is through the illness of distraction, when we are not present to the present. And that is linked with the other, anxiety, which is an overdoing of what is in itself a self-defense mechanism, healthy preoccupation and therefore preparation, the absence of which happens in, e.g., drug addicts, alcoholics, and gamblers, when they lose that notion of the future and live only for the satisfaction of the present. I want to attack head-on the gifts on this Vigil of Pentecost, one by one. You know that Blessed John Paul II, who I understand is very much on track for being St. Paul, John Paul II, he had, until the end of his life, a devotion which quite a few people do have, of praying every day explicitly for the 7 gifts. Each one is different and deserves attention. Wisdom. Wisdom is a participation in the wise ruler of the world, who has been there for a long time and is quite serene about it. He knows how things happen, why they happen, and what will happen and why. He sees all the angles of a problem. And by the way, that's part of the dysfunctionality of our conversations. We zoom in to parts. A person who is cultivated, cultured, and balanced sees all the elements of an equation and is less anxious to jump in. Wisdom is serene. Wisdom is patient. Wisdom does not zoom in and home into everything. We have to choose our battles. Life is too short to be spent all the time in issues. And that is part of the illness of many a pious soul. Everything is equally important. Everything is an issue. And time passes in one cosmic issue after another, losing the privilege of being there, in touch with God, with serene wisdom, unhurried and unannoyed. Wisdom also has to do with another which we will touch in a minute. Understanding, intellect. The Logos, the Word, is the second person of the Trinity, and in him is all knowledge, including all virtual knowledge. And by that I mean what could be. He sees from all eternity the chain effect of cause and effect, which is a cause and effect and a cause and effect in turn until the end of time, including the beyond, because effects also are eternal, for good or for bad. Now, we call it a miracle when the succession is broken. And that wisdom which made the laws of the universe steps in and says, halt, I'm putting another cause where it shouldn't be. It manifests itself as a miracle. And in the renewal, we see miracles, if it is renewal. And why not? The arm of the Lord is not shortened. And when I was in France in the mid-80s, we would see big-time miracles in the Charismatic renewal, which was happening there, with whole new congregations coming out of it. Men and women, usually young, living together and consecrating themselves to the Lord. And all the gifts were there. complete with great beauty and authenticity and orthodoxy, because they were very closely linked with the bishops. God is a God of surprises, and no less generous than his creatures, and zooms in when he finds an open space. Understanding, then, is a participation in the knowledge, the brain that made us. And that is received when we do what? You little people, it concerns you. When we are young, we are in the input part of life. We are taking in. A book is wiser than we are, so we listen to what the book has to say. A teacher is wiser than we are in the sphere of knowledge which that teacher has. We don't answer a teacher back, we ask questions. At home too, Mammy and Daddy have been there a little bit longer than we do, and we receive. We don't command or show off or think that we know better. As Oscar Wilde said, I'm not young enough to know everything. Wisdom, understanding, counsel. When one is involved with the kind of ministry that Noel or Aidan or others here are involved in, and indeed any priest and many a nun, one is involved with the participation in that goodness and kindness of the Holy Spirit, which is the word of counsel. Now, watch it. Counsel only happens properly when it hits the right problem. It's no different in the spiritual from what is being diagnosed in the physical. There is an element of spiritual surgery, and therefore we have to know what's wrong. That is therefore a participation in the picking up of things. We need to have that awareness of what's going on inside. That means that we too have something to learn from another being. If we come into that being with all the answers, that problem equals that answer, we are probably misfiring and also obstructing. Because counsel is to do with receiving, first of all. And for that to happen, one needs to be no less a listener than God himself, who's always on call. He's never on holiday. And therefore a priest is never on holiday and should not really be unknown, because if he is, he's making himself unavailable and switching off as a priest. He's not any use if he's not visible as a priest, because people come to you, even in a train, even in a bus, even in unexpected places like the main street of Rome, and ask you to hear that confession, because what visibly a priest would never happen if one is just in camouflage. A great victory for someone else, I would say. Now, counsel, therefore, is as calm as God himself. It doesn't rush in with the simple answer. And the more one gets involved with the ministry of counsel, the more one picks up that one actually has to say very little. It's a ministry of being there and showing that the person counts. And by the way, this is too important for little people. I just saw a very interesting video the other day. I had preached on suicide because there's an epidemic around it in our area. And my friend John, who does the website, had put up after it a video of a young girl, about 15 I'd say, who was just as a young girl to young girls saying, don't do it. And just the other day, I had to see Mam in Wales, and I was coming back over Britannia Bridge, which crosses from the mainland to the Menai, to Anglesey, and then on to Holyhead. And I just happened to see in Welsh, I didn't have time to go on because the first words of it were in Welsh, in English afterwards. It just said, are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling the blues? So I thought, wow, I know what that means. That means that this is the point where lots of people are throwing themselves off. It's so high, there's no way you could get away alive. If you mean business, you go there. And obviously it's been happening big time. So we're trying to warn people, there's somebody who cares. And this little lassie of 15 was trying to say, somebody cares. Because many suicides could be avoided if there was somebody there picking up the vibes, picking up the unsaid, watching the signals, just being there and not talking them out of existence. Because many a counsellor is so dysfunctional that even the person trying to help is no use whatsoever. Therefore, counsel is to do with letting the soul unbutton itself, unclothe itself, and show itself in all its nudity and pain. And that takes a certain abdication and stepping back. We let the person say what the person eventually would never say if we kept butting in. Listening is a whole art. And it starts with the notion that the person really exists. The person has his story, his life story, because things have their origin and problems are never simple. We need to know all, not just the tip of the iceberg. Counsel. Fortitude. Now, there is a difference between being a bully and being a strong person. A bully actually is a coward. He projects his fears. A strong person has his own serene and constant way of being consistent and winning through without damaging anyone around him or himself. Hitler was a bully. The Lord Jesus Christ was a calm and glorious victor who conquered the world. Now, we can participate in the devil's game of bullying souls, or we can participate in the Lord's game of winning souls. Christianity is caught, not taught. And I remember hearing when I was in the 70s in Aberystwyth there doing classics, I used to go sometimes on Saturday evening to the great sermon they'd have there in Alexandria Hall. It was a wonderful sermon that get people great value to preach, because Wales is a land of preachers. And one of them came out with this: "It's not what you say that counts, brethren, it's how you smell." There is an attraction to God which is made even out of the sense of humour. I remember when I was a student, I had a great friend who eventually became a vicar like his father, and his grandfather before him, Anglican, high Anglican. But boy, did he have a sense of humour. He was in Oxford and I was in Wales, and just to be with him for a few hours, because we'd go from one to the other, it was something that lifted the soul. You would hardly laugh, but he would get people bent in two in laughter. The English wit, but you got it too. The unexpected word. And even the letters, they used to be theoretically once a week, complete with medieval illuminations in the margins, little chuckles, academic style. The unexpected word. But it's worth it. Cultivating joy, which is also surely a gift of the Holy Ghost. And I remember when I was being confirmed at the age of 17, I went to confession the night before in a cathedral in Cardiff, and the good priest on the other side of the grill, I was expecting some holy advice, something very intense and profound, and he said to me, "Now, congratulations on your confirmation tomorrow at the hands of Bishop Mullins. Ask the Holy Ghost for the gift of a sense of humour." I came down a notch, but only later did I discover in a monastic life how correct he was. Boy, does the sense of humour diffuse a few time bombs. There's a big difference, by the way, between monastic life in France and monastic life in Britain, because in monastic life in France they go towards the maximum. Nuclear explosions, it's all been there underneath until it explodes big time and calms down with profuse apologies, kissing the ground and so on. In England it's handled indirectly and it's brought down a few notches. In Ireland it's somewhere in between. Counsel. fortitude, knowledge. I go back to student days, I suppose third time round by then. It was doing theology at this time in Bangor. And again, I used to drift towards things. Actually, it was on a Friday night it used to happen there. And they were pretty good, actually. And some of them were very charismatic. And people would go into prayer with a certain intensity. And because we were young, we were able also to create a great deal of beauty, which, by the way, heals the soul and glorifies God at the same time. Authentic beauty, modern and yet truly healing. I missed it, actually, when I got away from there. It was very moving and authentic, I would say. But because it was authentic, the Lord also was taking us as seriously as we were taking Him. And things would happen. I remember one time we were in prayer, a good number of us, and it was very intense. And at a certain point, we were all there with our eyes closed. And somebody came up with this. I can see a white sheet, and in the midst I can see a red blob. I didn't know what it meant. So we're carrying on in prayer. That was a man, I think, a boy. And then this female voice came up. I'm getting it too. And she was also getting what it meant. That is a drop of blood in the midst of some kind of hospital linen. There's somebody here who's had an abortion, one of the girls. The Lord is asking that girl to come back now and to get washed in the blood of Christ. So it was all discreet. You don't know who it was, at least I don't know who it was, but it was true. Another time, I was in France, and there were about 7,000 of us in a huge charismatic convention there in Ars, where the Curé had been. And it was on Thursday night, I remember, and I was moved to tears to see our God moving. I thought, this is happening because all these 7,000 people are taking God seriously. He's zooming into this open space. And we had, for those hours of prayer, all before the sacrament exposed, miracle after miracle, gift after gift being poured out upon us, and all being put on video, modern memes. And things like this were coming out. Right now, there's a person whose leg is shorter than the other, and the Lord is healing it, and it's growing to the same size as the other one right now. All this creation of matter on the spot. Things would happen. We saw on video what happened the previous year. There's a girl here, about 30 years of age, she's sterile. The Lord is healing her of her sterility, and she'll have a child this time next year, and he was baptized a year later in the same convention. Miraculous conception. Things were happening one after the other, the words of knowledge. And I remember there was one which hit me in particular, it was this. There's somebody at the back of the basilica there, we don't know who it was, but the Lord knows there. There's somebody there who 10 years ago shot somebody. It was never found out. It's all been held secret. But the Lord is calling that person now to be reconciled and to be washed in the blood of Christ. And they were to come to confession, of course, anonymously. And it was true. We don't know who it was, but it happened, and that person was sorted out. We heard about it later. That is our God. I remember saying to myself, I actually wrote a poem on it at the time, I cannot anymore not be a part of this. This is real stuff. This renewal is genuine, as long as we're authentic and not jazzy and, as it were, using our God and putting him in our pocket. He is God, but if he is, we honour him and know that he can do far more than we can possibly imagine. All he wants is that we give him space. So knowledge is a participation in God's knowledge, and it happens when we are in what? Receptive mode. Input. Taking things in. It's only an empty vessel that can be filled. It's only somebody who's not answering who's picking up all. But that too is true in prayer and in contact. And I'm insisting on one point I want you to take away with you. If you don't take anything else with you tonight, it's this. Get into that mode. Because otherwise you'll go through life with your stagnant quantity of things acquired. It's to do with abdicating and emptying yourself. You have everything to learn. So a person comes to you and you have everything to learn. You come to prayer and you have everything to learn. You go for the sacrament and you have everything to learn. There are people who are going into adoration and telling the Lord all he doesn't know. It's to do with letting him reign and be God. And perhaps say a word. And he does, if we calm down and get into receptive mode. You know, it's the difference between a radio, a wireless, or a telephone. The radio, the wireless, only has the input mode. Rather, it doesn't. It only has the output mode. It only emits. It's only the telephone that has the input and the output. And the output will only be relevant if the input is fully on. There are people who are wirelesses. They only have the output. And it's the same in prayer. They can't receive. It's the same actually in the sacraments. People can't receive. They are in control of the sacraments. Noisy, exteriorized celebrations. The Lord needs time and space to reign in the heart that he is coming and asking hospitality from. The space we must make before, during, and after. There is a chant which is healing and glorifying God. There's another which is crowding God out. It's far better to have a quiet Taizé chant or something that people know from their memory without any obligation to fiddle through books and sheets rather than to do anything but the essential. There is a quiet mode of praying in chant which sustains prayer without excluding it. There's a big difference. Knowledge then. Piety, differently translated. This element of honouring God as he deserves to be honoured. True piety is to do with giving God what? His rights, his throne, his place. In the first place, time. Time. He has to reign over our clock. And in physical terms, that means putting the notch of the alarm at a point where he reigns also on the first fruits. Because if you fire the rocket properly, there's a chance it'll go in the right direction. You plunge into your work and you've missed those points you never get again. Start well. Beginnings check and consequences follow. You don't get back those first moments that you've lost. There's a long tradition in the East and the West of giving God the beginning. Mass, until very recently, was always coinciding with the rising of the sun. In our monastery, it was still the case. Those big eastern windows facing the rising sun, and we would still face the east on the high altar with incense every morning, facing the rising sun. Christ, giving him the first fruits. About 4 or 5 hours of nothing but prayer before anything else happened. The whole secret of getting up in the night. That's the monastic regime. It's worked, it still works. And it's coming back to the people how now in adoration, nocturnal adoration. Those quiet moments, you're still and the Lord can get through to you. Because our God is a quiet God. And to reign, he needs stillness and a certain absence of complication. But I want just to attack one point when I'm on this question of piety. It's this. We can kid ourselves in one concrete issue. We can be fabricating great innovations of beauty in disobedience. And there's a lot of that going on our altars. More than you think. Often out of goodwill and ignorance, but it's happening because even the lay people are not aware that they're quite often disobeying. I will attack a few direct things. It is quite clear in this new missal how certain things are to be done. And woe betide the soul who handles God in his disobedience to God. You know how Holy Communion has to be done. It has to be done under the terms of the church. And only the priest or the deacon may go into the tabernacle and appropriate the Blessed Sacrament. All that any other person does by delegation has to happen in a mode of receiving and not appropriating. And it's quite clear, and it's been insisted upon again by the Vatican, no lay person may receive himself, that is, take the chalice. It has to be given by the celebrant or the deacon who has received it from the priest anyway. Also, they are not to be coming up to the altar, and this is actually in the rubrics, in this new one, it's quite clear. They should not be coming up to the altar before the priest's communion. And because there are fundamental reasons for that, they're not concelebrants. And also it's in the instructions given clearly by the congregation that they should never ever be treated as concelebrants in the way in which they receive communion. They have to receive it like the others and not be given it before the Ecce Agnus Dei, behold the Lamb of God. They are not concelebrating. Even a deacon has not the right to receive it at that point. He is given it as a communicant, not as a celebrant. They should not either presume the right to bless. A lay person has no right to bless. He can only invoke a blessing, he can do that certainly, but he can't confer a blessing. Only the priest conformed to Christ's high priesthood can give a blessing. Remember that. Because we don't know what these people have in their hands, what they've touched at night, what New Age stuff they're involved in. We should not have people blessing our children and laying hands on them if they're not protected by the consecration of the Holy Ghost. They should never, as happens in England a lot now, be purifying the chalices and drinking it. At least somebody who's properly instituted as an acolyte may purify the chalice, but it has to be drunk by the priest or deacon at the altar and then put on the credence table on a corporal. But no layperson should be drinking the precious blood from the chalice when it is received from the people afterwards. And this is happening a lot in Britain. It came from the States, but it was clamped down upon. Actually, the bishop was taken back by the last pope. What's called the American Indict was withdrawn by the last pope. A lesson to all that these have to be obeyed. Because we can't honour God on our own terms. God has to be honoured as in the Levitical law by the means that he's given. And think of the way that the Jews took this seriously. Those centuries of formation we have got. It's all the divine pedagogy for our fullness. The Mosaic law was not just out of the window. We have the fullness of it, but all that was showing how God wanted to reign, this otherness and holiness. So we honour God with obedience to his divine will in concrete terms. Which brings me to the last. Fear of God, holy fear. If you ever have a chance to go into some Eastern country, drop into an Eastern church. Observe, first of all, its format. The otherness of God, God in the Holy of Holies, the holy doors, closed and veiled. That comes from the Old Testament, but they've got it and it's come from the early church in the East. It grew spontaneously. Now, when it comes to the West, we have had more renewal than they have in the East. The Lord is all free to move because we have the whole organism of teaching, the ecumenical councils and the teaching function of the Pope. Whereas they haven't got that possibility in the East in the same way, so where they're at now is where they were before. But they are precisely where they were before, and we see history in the East. And they have kept this holy fear, mysterium tremendum et fascinans, a mystery which is both tremendous and fascinating. Go into an Eastern celebration if you ever have a chance, if you're travelling, and go into those 3 hours of smoke and incense and otherness, and come out transformed, because God has a chance to get into your soul in those 3 hours. You're alone with your thoughts. You're alone with the angels, with the suggestiveness of something bigger than yourselves. It's not a club, it's not a chatting house. It's God and man meeting at a point in which they both understand each other perfectly. Because silence and mystery are the language in which the soul truly meets God, not in a simplistic bringing down of God to our level. We have lost from thinking that we've got it more correctly than our brethren in the East and than our own ancestors in the West. It's not either or, but it has to be both and at least, and kept in perfect balance. Which brings me to my last point. If God is God, and we let him be God, then he'll do what? He'll zoom into that. He'll be allowed to reign. He'll be able to move. I remember my friends saying that in university, we want to see our God moving. She was actually a Catholic, watching our Pentecostal brethren, seeing how the Lord was allowed to move, and he did move, because they gave him the space. Whereas we had our thing so well defended that God couldn't get a word in edgeways. We have him so much under control that we're controlling him when he's not reigning over us, and not giving us all that package of surprises that he has ready for us. Pentecost, my friends, is about a God of surprises who's a bit cheesed off, I'd say, because we've got it so correct.